Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, whenever time it might be where you are out there. Welcome back to the live stream. My name is CSharpFritz, and today it's beautiful. It's sunny outside. We're closing in on the winter holidays, and today we're going to learn a little bit more about C#. We're going to learn about ASP.NET MVC with ASP.NET Core and .NET 5. How you doing there, chat room? Look, it's beautiful outside. Let's bring the chat room in here. There they are. How's it going over there? Blazor's here. Shy Sharp. Is that Zidosis? Good afternoon to you. Another random guy with the poggers. Hello, hello. Shy Sharp hopes to learn to build a private site with .NET accessible for computers in your house. Terrific. I've got a stream actually coming up on my channel on Thursday where I'm going to show about building with Synology. A Synology device, a home server, Blazor, and a Raspberry Pi. NetJam Jr. says this is fortunate timing for them trying to learn MVC. Terrific. As always with these sessions, the AMA tag should be on. You should be able to. It's not. It's not. Let's turn that AMA tag on. Let's turn on the education tag. I don't know where these went to. They're not activated for us here on Twitch. I'm going to activate web development, and I should be able to get software development in here as well. There we go, and it's off the bottom of the screen. I can't click done. There we go. Now the tags are lit up. The AMA tag is on. Please, if you have any questions about the content along the way, you're welcome to ask them. They'll appear right along the bottom here, just like this one, and we'll be happy to answer your questions as we go. All of these questions will end up being tagged in the YouTube video, and of course, if you're watching the YouTube video, click the description just below and you'll see a complete list of all the questions that the audience asked during the live presentation, and you can jump to any of those topics that might be appropriate for something that you're interested in. Click and jump right to it, and if you're watching live, I'm sorry, I don't know the questions that are going to be asked over the next 2 hours. If I knew that, I'd be placing some bets on the Super Bowl coming up here. Make a little bit of cash. How's it going there? Is that Govnoidovich from Moscow? Welcome in. Hello, hello. Steven is here. Howdy, howdy. Code with Sean. Good morning to you. Blazor has a big project for a website starting in January where you can use .NET 5 and C# 9. Nice. Nice. MVC framework and the MVC pattern sometimes confuses you. GA Crow, let's get to the bottom of that. Let's see if we can get you some help here today while we're going through. Good morning to you, Lich0. Hello, hello. Good morning. Yeah, sorry, the hat bot doesn't run on this channel. All right, let's get into this. Let's talk about the topic today. I'm going to get some music playing here in the background. This is, of course, stream beats from our friend Harris Heller. This is music that's been approved. It's been released royalty-free. It's all instrumental and kind of groovy music that we can have playing in the background, whether it's on Twitch, YouTube, wherever you may want to listen to some groovy music with your content. All released free for anybody to use, royalty-free. Thank you so much, Harris. We appreciate you making this music available for us to listen to wherever we might be streaming and creating content. Nope, Google services are back up and running. Confusing how to write tests and which library to use with Blazor. We won't be talking about Blazor today. Blazor we won't be getting into probably until the spring. But if you're writing tests for Blazor, I do recommend you check out BUnit from our friend Eagle Hansen, and that'll help you with writing unit tests for Blazor. And I won't get into any samples with that today, but that's a good place for you to start. He's been on a number of podcasts and live streams showing how to use that tool recently, so you're bound to be able to find some videos on that. You're going to start a fairly good-sized web app project with microservices. You have a legacy application in .NET Framework 4.7, planning to use .NET 5 now. Support from awesome people. Oh my gosh, thank you so much, GA Crow. That's so kind of you. Thank you for the kind words. In today's session, we just did the introduction to MVC last time. And in today's session, I'm trying to listen to make sure I level set the audio here in the background. I think it's just loud enough that it's in the background. We learned how to do some basic gets and navigate around what layouts were, what views were, how to interact with our controllers. We learned a little bit about action result and what we could do with that. But today, let's get into actually writing some forms. Let's get into actually interacting with the viewers that are visiting our website. Let's receive data from them, and let's talk about things like model binding, and we're going to talk a little bit about data annotations, validation. I'd like to get into configuration, and if we can sneak it in at the end, we're going to talk about logging as well. So that's where I want to go today. I had a full weekend this weekend with the family, so I don't have a full set of notes with documentation at the time of the live broadcast. Hopefully, within a day or so of having the YouTube broadcast published, I'll have the rest of that ready to go and published on the GitHub website. So if you are watching from the recording, make sure you check the description below for the links to the GitHub repository. Like I said, all the questions, links to our samples today. If you're watching live, there's a link in chat to the GitHub repository. The notes are not out there yet. There's a pull request with where I got to and some of the samples. Depending on where we go, we'll curve those samples appropriately. We'll build them out appropriately here live on stream. So Ajax on the next stream, Ajax I think is a topic that is outside of ASP.NET. That's not really an ASP.NET thing. SignalR is something that I would get into. Web API is something that I would get into, but Ajax is a JavaScript concern, not something that I would cover as part of this series of streams. You opened prompted with a CAPTCHA and it showed your IP address. Yeah, see, that's annoying as somebody who's live streaming. You will learn how to contribute in a mobile app repo in GitHub. There are other places that I can point you to. Check out First Timers Only for GitHub. There's a couple of websites like that that'll teach you how to be a responsible contributor to an open source project and give you a list of some open source projects that you can connect to. It's not something that I'm going to cover today. We're talking about and getting into MVC today. All right. So let me I'm trying to balance between my microphone and the music in the background here. So let me head over and start talking about model view controller. Let's talk about MVC a little bit here. And get into a sample project and start talking about building with forms. So I've already got a sample project built and it's over here. Let me head over to the code and we'll take a look at this. Come on, get over here. Hi, I'm over here now. I have Visual Studio 2019 open and I have a sample called mycoolapp.web. You'll find this inside the sessions season 2 0203. That's where it will be if you're watching the recording. The sample files are out there for you. I'm going to actually start this. That's not right. Not wrong folder. This folder. And there we go. I'm going to .NET Watch run so that this is just running and rebuilding in the background and we're able to just connect and see the content as it's being updated as we're talking through it here live on stream. You're looking forward to the API stream? Yeah, probably. So we are going to take a break for the holidays here. Take about a 3-week break, 2-3 week break. And 2 weeks. We'll be back on January 4th with our next episode after this one. for those that are watching live. And if you're not watching live, now you know when to tune in next time. So I'm not sure we'll get into the API. Maybe we will do the API stream next time. And then we can talk about some other... I have to do some significant planning of where to go next. But we might be able to do API next. Multi-tenancy is a question here. Multi-tenancy... Let me bring up this question before I get into... Are we going to look into multi-tenancy? Multi-tenancy is an architecture pattern that you can add on top of ASP.NET that not... It's very specialized for people that are building product websites. And it's not something that is really a drive of this type of beginner type of session. It's certainly an advanced topic. There are dozens of ways to do this. Gosh, the way I built multi-tenant websites back in 2005, 2008, significantly different from how people do it today. So, something that we could do as a more advanced topic on a different stream, but I don't think we would see it during the core bits of this series. Maybe we would touch on it at the end of this season, talk about multi-tenancy, but it's a very complex topic. Multi-tenancy, for those of you who aren't familiar, is the ability for you to have a different skin, a different theme, and almost an isolated version of a website, a web application for different groups of users. That might be because you sold a contract to customer A, customer B, and customer C, and each one of those customers, as they use your application, has a completely isolated experience that's unique and does not touch the data of the other customers. So they may have a different theme that's applied, some different coloring. They may have different features turned on and off, but the appearance of those different tenants having different isolated data repositories or even commingled data repositories that are being separated at the time of display. It's a very advanced topic, and it's actually something that is for developers that are building a website that is a product. It's a very valuable skill to know how to do. So this is not the default. This is Windows Terminal with PowerShell running. I like the green and black theme, but I've also put the Fritz and Friends wallpaper in the background. You can find all of my configuration for my terminal in my, I believe it's in my, it's either in my .files repository under CSharpFritz on GitHub, or it's under Livestream. One of those two repositories. It's over there. More emojis in Windows Terminal. No. Have I played Cyberpunk yet? No, I have it installed and running on the machine over here, and I just haven't gotten around to it. I have a couple things that I'm trying to accomplish, trying to wrap up before the holiday here, and I definitely want to play Cyberpunk. I'm very interested. I'm a big fan of that science fiction future genre that is very high tech, and films like The Matrix and Johnny Mnemonic heavily inspired by the cyberpunk genre, right? So big fan of that. I've read Neuromancer, a number of other books. Absolutely in love with that genre of science fiction, that subgenre of science fiction. It looks very cool. I've seen our live coder friend Fierce Kittens playing on stream. It's the game looks absolutely gorgeous. The graphics are phenomenal. Very bright, very well rendered, just amazing. And I haven't gotten there yet. I'm going to get there during the vacation break. I have tried. I was a big fan of Myst as a college kid, and that was just released for Oculus. I've been playing that on the Oculus, and that is amazing. Really, really good. So, can I disable syncs while touching on logging? We'll see if we get there. Logging is going to be one of the last topics that we get to, and I'm not going to quite get to talking about. I'm not sure if we're going to get to talk about syncing today. The various logging configuration. Maybe I even push logging out to next time, because there's samples that I would like to have with that I just don't have ready for today's stream. This machine has a this is an Intel NUC that has an ATI card, the high-end ATI card on it. I don't know what the model is, but it's on chip. It's pretty cool. All right, so I have my application here running, and we can get into this. Oh, there's hang on, let me, one more question here, and I want to make sure I answer. Do the videos live, the video recordings live on the Visual Studio channel? On YouTube, they live on the .NET channel. So, youtube.com, I'm trying to go over Stream Elements, and I have a command, actually, that'll tell you this. youtube.com/.net, and it doesn't have a full URL, but it's the C# on CSharpFritz playlist is there. You can go into there. Yeah. Wait a sec. I'm on the wrong channel. Change channels. 1 second. If you go to, youtube.com/.net/ yeah, here we go. There you go. There's a link to the entire series of videos for those of you that are watching live. All right. So I have the application running. Let me bring this over. And, right, typical ASP.NET website with header, footer, the welcome. I added a couple links in the middle here because I want to start talking about forms with today's interactions, today's session, right? How do we build a form? How do we get data back from that form? How do we then take those additional steps to validate the contents of the form, inspect and raise appropriate error messages, these types of things. So let's dig in here a little bit, and right as I'm saying this, I know we had a question about logging with log sync configuration. I think I need to get into globalization and localization in a future stream as well. So I'm going to take those notes, add them to the backlog of content that we're going to discuss here on this stream, on this series. So I have a couple of these, and I want to go through and just talk about, right, building, gosh, if you're building a search engine, you're building some sort of a search appliance, right? People want to be able to search for data in your application. You would put up a little text box with a go button. Maybe the go button would be over on the end, and for some reason they didn't place it on the end. No matter. I've created a form controller, and we can take a look at this. I'll pin that. And this is the basic one here, basic, because we're just doing a basic search, and it's just div class form group. I've got an input type text, name is search, form control with a placeholder that says search, with a go button that says go, and that's it, right? I've got this down here. We'll see what this does in a minute. But when I want to have this post back, I want to have the, right, and I know that's kind of a dirty word for some folks. I want to post this data, whatever's keyed into that search box. I want to have that go to my controller so I can process, do something with it, search in this case, and return some results. I'm not actually going to search and return some results. Yes, these are Bootstrap classes that I'm using. Bootstrap comes with ASP.NET MVC. Library, there's Bootstrap. jQuery and jQuery validation comes with this, and we'll talk about that when we get to validation as well. I know some folks like to knock jQuery and jQuery validation, but there's some things that it does really, really well for us that we'll see in a minute here. So we're just formatting and outputting data here, and I want to have this post back to my server so we can use this HTML helper. to say, begin a form right here. And we're going to have it post to an action called basic form inside of a controller called form. Now, right, and there you see the IntelliSense for it. If you can, I know on if you're watching on a phone or something that's really small, trust me, it says action name, controller name as the two parameters. You actually don't even need to place those parameters, and you don't even need to use this using syntax. If you'd like, of course, right, you can do form method equals post, right, action equals, and you can specify wherever it is you'd like it to be posted. Right, maybe I want it to go there. Okay. And that's perfectly fine. You can write your own form tag to do this, and consequently, when I come back over here and I refresh, we take a look at the source code, of course. Scrolling down here, right, there's my form method, blah blah blah, right? I've got an extra I didn't properly put that inside there. Refresh. Come on, go away. There it is. Good. Right, there's my form that I wrote into my page, and it's being output right there. Now, right, typically when you're receiving data from a form, you want to use a post method, right? We want to put that into the body of what we're loading, what we're sending to the server, and some action. What's the URL that you're posting that to, right? So you can do it this way with standard HTML with input tags, but by doing a the using tag helper here, and right there, I'll comment that one, I'll comment this one. By using this using tag helper, what it will do is it'll actually generate the appropriate URL. I can even drop that out entirely. This is rebuilding in the background. So, and if I refresh, by just saying begin form, it will create my form, and it will generate it with the same name as the action, as the URL that I'm sitting on, with a default method of post. That might be okay for you. That might be just fine and work out very nicely for you. You may want to define what action you want to post back to. And we've seen actions handle query string information and go and return information back to back through views, or right, there's other ways that we can return data. We saw returning data formatted as JSON, but we want to clean this up. We want to be able to receive this search text box and actually the output from it and process and take appropriate steps. Nothing else matters, has a question here about the user interface that we're using. Let me bring this up. I see that we're using Bootstrap. Can I give a 60,000 foot explanation of Bootstrap versus Vue, React, Angular? Two different things. Two different things. Vue, React, Angular are JavaScript user interface frameworks that manage the entire state and processing with client-side JavaScript. So in the browser, JavaScript that runs to manage all of your interactions. Bootstrap is a user interface framework. It's a CSS set of styles that change the appearance of your controls and help manage your layout. Where Vue, React, Angular help you manage the interaction, programmatic interaction of things. Okay, where right, Bootstrap just changes the appearance of it. Okay, so all right. So what we have here is, right, I'm using a controller called form, And that's what we're using to format our data and present it. I'm sorry. We're using a controller named form, and that is here because I named it form controller because I'm going to show you a couple different ways to interact with form data. And so typically you would have your get and your post method for the same form with the same name, right? Because there's a pattern that a lot of folks like to use in web development. Let me grab this. Called post redirect get. Come on, pull this out. And there's a nice article here on Wikipedia. Thanks. About the web development pattern post redirect get, where you're going to be presented with some sort of a form. You're going to submit the form via an HTTP post to a web server that will insert an order in the database, take whatever actions, redirect back to the browser, and tell them, okay, you're done posting, go get the results page. And it goes and gets that results page that has some confirmation that says, oh, completed, you finished whatever that task is, and shows that completed page to the browser. So this post redirect get, I probably said request there, post redirect get pattern also allows folks to not bookmark the post results page. The post results page, right? This page, after it inserts the order into the database, if people refresh that page, you may inadvertently double insert records, double action whatever was supposed to be processed from that post. So by doing post redirect get, you prevent that post from happening multiple times by default. Okay? So what you'll see is folks will set these up so that they have the same name, but because they're actions, they can actually receive, because they're methods, they can receive different parameters. So I can call this basic1, and it's the same action, but this one will decorate with a post, HTTP post attribute. Now that's going to change the way that the routing interacts with this controller. By default, all of our public actions are accessible through a get, right? Just browsing, you type in an address, that's a get. But when you press a button on a form to post data, that will interact and send to a different location. And we're posting back, in this case, the information that's in our search box. So because this text box is named search, we can receive the contents of that in this string parameter called search. I'll take those and I'll do something with that. I'll move them along. In this case, I'm going to emit them back to you, right? I'm going to report it back, echo that back to you. So what I do in this case, okay, we're going to receive the post in this method. I'm going to add to an object that's available to us in the ASP.NET called temp data. This is available inside of controllers. I believe it's also available inside of Razor pages. We'll get to that when we come back around to Razor pages. And this is a set of data that's available for one additional request to the server. Once it's been presented in a view, it's deleted. It's forgotten. So this is a way for you to emit validation results, the feedback that an order was processed successfully, whatever that information that was posted has been handled and it's now processed properly, right? So we can put into temp data information that we want to show on screen on the next page after we do a redirect. Now, we were used to seeing return a view, and a view, right, came out of our views folder over here. I have a form child folder under views because that's the name of my controller, form controller. So I'm grabbing for basic 1, the basic CSHTML file. When it posts, when I'm done adding to the temp data, redirect to another action. Go do something else. Send a redirect command to the browser that this is done, go somewhere else. And I'm telling it to go to the basic 1 get. So it's going to come back up here, which will just return the view. I don't want to just return the view directly. If I did return the view directly, you'd be able to repost that data. So you need to be aware of that. So let me show you what this interaction looks like, and we'll then back out so that it doesn't behave properly. So I'm going to refresh my page. Here I am, simple search form, and I'm going to search for some data here. Right? I don't know. What am I going to search for? Groundhog Day. I want to search for Groundhog Day. Go, and it redirected back. Right? Let me show you the network here. Let me refresh the page. So I did a, let's just look at the HTML. No, show me all of them, right? So here I am looking at the basic page, that basic 1 page that I navigated to, and I'll search for something else here. It doesn't matter, it's just gonna be echoed back. Visual Studio, go. Now look, it did a post to basic 1, and that post sent back a message to redirect, 302 redirect back to basic 1. So it went and get that data. And now it finishes painting with CSS, JavaScript, blah, 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 blah. Okay. So post, I received the redirect and I went and get the next page. Makes sense. And if I refresh this page with a Control F5, it doesn't have my data reposting. If I change this from redirect to just view, and I specify the view name of basic 1, I'll save, let that recompile. There we go. And go back to my page here. I'll refresh. And this time I'll search for C#, doesn't matter. Go. Okay. It didn't redirect. This is the result of the post. It just painted the form. So now if I press F5, now my browser's telling me, we're going to send information back, and we're going to repeat that action. So think about this. If you were on a website that was a storefront, and you just keyed in your payment information and you clicked post, and it comes back and it says, oh, we've successfully charged your credit card, we've charged your PayPal account appropriately, blah, 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 and you pressed F5 on that page, and it was configured like this, well, now you've just been charged again. F5 again, you've been charged a third time. Now you're gonna get three PlayStation 5s sent to you. That might not be a bad thing. 3 Xboxes, that might not be a bad thing. That'd be a very good thing, in fact, I think. So you don't want to create multiple records. So I strongly recommend you don't return a view directly here after your processing is complete. Instead, do a redirect to action. There are other redirect methods here. Redirect permanent. You can return a redirect result. Yeah. Right, and you can actually specify a URL for it to go to at that point. Redirect to a Razor page. Redirect to a specific route. Yeah. So, right. I could say return new redirect result, and I can specify the full URL here if I wanted. Right? We're going to redirect you to Bing. I can do that. I don't know why you would do that, but you can do that. And it will appropriately do that redirection. So we'll search for C#, go, and I'm on Bing. I don't know why, but you're here. that might be something you want your application to do. I don't know. But if you're staying within the same application, it's real easy to say just redirect to action result. In this case, I'm redirecting to the same, there we go. To the same action in the same controller. You can send it to another controller if you'd like by specifying the name of the controller there. And there's this route values. You can pass extra information in for other actions to be able to consume. But we're just at the beginning here. Let's dig in a little bit further. What if we have a model? Some sort of an object that we're presenting, we want to receive, we want to load up. So I have a sample here called model that I've already built that we can talk about. So if I've got a form with a model like this one, where I'm collecting some demographic information, your name, your city, age, and we want to be able to interact, right? Receive the data about this person we're registering. So, right, I'm going to receive name is Fritz, city is the only city that matters. No, kidding. Age is okay. I'm dreaming, all right, but I'm receiving that information inside of this form that I want to be able to process. I have a model for that, right? Here's the model view controller, right? There we go. So I have a model called person. I should have created a second person class. That's right, nearly 21. That's right. And this person class, you know what? I'm gonna go and do this right now on the fly. Let me call this, let's call this employee, just so it's different. And back here on person, I'm going to get rid of this. And we'll modify the controller on the other side. Okay. Finish loading. Hello. You're gonna make me sad here, aren't you? There you go. Look, already contains the definition for person. Yeah, I know. That's why I renamed it. Save the file. There it goes. Live coding, right? This is what happens. We'll get into that, Alpha Gamer. Hang on. There we go. So I have name, city, age that I've got being output. We'll come back to employee in a minute. Right, ASP label 4. I'm sorry, label ASP4, label ASP4, and I have that information being output for me. Our model carries information about the contents of it. So we can use these tag helpers, ASP4, ASP validation 4, to process and present information on screen. Okay. Now we're going to start to see some productivity pick up here. We don't have to get into writing custom code to do all of these things for us. So I'm going to specify inside of this page that I'm presenting as my initial visit to this page where I'm going to register, collect profile information, what have you. I'm receiving information about a person, and I can use this ASP4 to reference that property inside of the model object I want to receive, and it will automatically generate the label for me. It'll automatically generate the appropriate input type for me. And I've put a bootstrap class of form control on here so that it lays out and looks nice. We'll see more about the validation for. I think I can get rid of these over here. No, that one's fine. I can get rid of those because they're in. Yeah, they're in that sample. Good. So I'm going to just generate this data, and these helper methods, right, these helper tags here are going to generate the appropriate tags that I want inside of my page. Check this out. I'm going to scroll down here. Here's my form receiving that data. I didn't specify that this was an input type of text or that the name of the name label is name. It just derived and output that for me, right? In city, right, it knows that that's a text field. But down here, look at this. For the age, now see, I thought I removed required over there. 1 second. I thought I removed that. I did. You know what? It probably did that because it's an int. No matter. I'm not going to dig into that. Just taking a look at, I'm going to grab Jason's comment there and come back to it in just a minute. So this is an integer, and because it's receiving a number, it's actually set up the input type as a type of number. Take a look, right? I've got my, and if we were looking at this on a phone, I've got these spin buttons to be able to key in appropriately, right? And those spin buttons will appear differently depending on the different browsers, depending on your device. If you're on a phone, if you're on a tablet, these spin buttons appear differently. But, right, I can key in some data now, right? So I'll key in Fritz, Philadelphia. All right, I'm 22. And save. And I do that same post, redirect, get, and I've output my information here that was saved, right? Take a look back at the model. So now if I received a person, I get this. Oh, wait a sec. Check this out. I can tell it not that I need each one of those individual fields. I can tell ASP.NET, you're receiving a person object. And ASP.NET will do what's called model binding to take those various text fields, the various fields that were submitted, and map them to properties of that input parameter that we're receiving. That's right, I don't look a day over 22. Darn Skippy. Gonna have to show some ID. So, this will allow us then to take some more advanced interactions with how we build out data, right? This is where we start to get into something that's more along the lines of a view model, something that we want to receive from the screen, from our visitors, do some processing on it, turn it into appropriate insert and update statements for a database, turn it into some JSON we're going to serialize to disk, what have you. Okay, so by receiving this information and processing it in this way, I've eliminated all the need to be able to inspect and find all those fields and get the names lined up right, saved and input into that object. ASP.NET does all of that left-right property setting code for us. We don't need to do that. Go do this on our own. Let me pause for a second here. There's a couple questions I want to make sure that we answer here. Is this RazG95 asks, what's the framework version we're using? This is .NET 5. This is .NET 5 ASP.NET Core 5 that we're using. And if I open up, you can see my project is .NET 5, and I'm using the Web SDK. So thank you. I didn't make that clear from the start. This is .NET 5. We're going to be using .NET 5 on this series going forward because that is the current most recently released version of the .NET Core .NET frameworks. So there's also a question here from Jason, who noticed in my person declaration here, I have the serializable attribute on this. Thoughts on using serializable, Jason asks. So by placing serializable on a class like this, you're telling the .NET framework, in this case .NET 5, you're telling it that this class can be serialized. It can be converted into data that would be saved automatically by the framework and saved to disk, to a database, to memory, but it can be serialized and placed into those different locations. And I'm using this, I'm kind of cheating here. I'm using that serialization so that I can see, notice I have tempdata.add and I added a string. Tempdata only supports the value types, strings and dates, a very small subset of data types that you can add to temp data. So I grabbed an extension method that was written called put that will serialize my data as whatever object I pass in as JSON, as that JavaScript object notation format. And it'll also allow me to get data back out as whatever object type I placed into it. It'll appropriately deserialize, right? Serialize takes an object, turns it into one of these persistent formats. Deserialize takes that persistent format and turns it back into an object that we can work with in .NET. So by using the serializable attribute here, it forces the serializer to inspect and be able to work with this class. So I added that little extension method, and those methods will be available in the source code in the samples in the GitHub repository. Let me take another look here. Yes, I'm using it because I'm pushing it into temp data. So all I'm doing in the response is I'm saying, well, inside of temp data, if we have a person object, we'll go write out the properties of that person object. Here's their name, their city, their age, and you saw that on screen right here. Okay, but when we're working with an object like person in this case, there's properties that are going to be required. There's properties that are going to have minimum and maximum values. There's validation that we want to place on our objects so that you can interact with it, so that you can be sure that they're being validated appropriately. We're already getting the framework helping us to receive and mash together what that object is. We can also do validation, and that's what I was starting to do with the full version of the person object there that I just renamed to employee, right? I want to put a little validation around this. So let me go over to my form controller. So I wrote another method here called validate, and instead of receiving a person, I'm going to receive an employee, and that's fine. We're going to actually be able to validate the data inside of that. Let me go back over here to validate. I'm going to change my model to employee. No. There we go. So this time I've taken, and let me put these side by side here so that you can see a little bit of difference here. So in my original page with receiving a person object that didn't have any validation, I'm just saying ASP4, label ASP4, input ASP4, and it just output text boxes and labels appropriately. But now inside of my form, and I'm using form method post here, so it posts back to the same name. I can add things like ASP4 here and specify an action that I want it to go. I'm sorry, ASP, right? ASP action, there it is. And I can specify the action to post back to, as well as ASP controller, right? I can have it post back to some other location. But for the purposes of this, I'm having it go to the same place. It's kind of a good standard to have, right? To have your form post back to the same name, even though it's going to be handled by a different method. But I added this span here that now says ASP validation for the name property, right? I don't have any validators around my my city, I'm going to make city be kind of optional here. And I'll have an ASP validation for age. And I'll be able to output validation information there. Now, if I go back over to the employee object, we've added these attributes. This is a feature of .NET. You can, and C# programming language supports these attributes. The .NET component model annotations, right? This is something standard that's available for you. If I go into display, system, I didn't ask for you. System component model data annotations. This library, which comes by default, it's enabled in your ASP.NET application, has the ability to change the display here. So I can change my label, how this property is referenced, by setting a name on this attribute. So now everywhere in my application that references the display for this property will by default get employee name. And we'll see in a future episode how you can use some localization to put translations in there so that it'll translate that name appropriately wherever that name property is being used throughout your application. So I do the same thing here, and right, so that display will be enforced when I show my page. It'll generate those labels for me. Right? I haven't modified my view. My view just says label for employee, and there it is. Right? It's just outputting whatever the employee says the default label should be. Of course, you can override it on each page by writing whatever text, but right, this is a way for you to define a standard using your component of this is what the label that goes with this property should be. Now, there were also in there, I have required, right? That's a required field. You must place a value in that, right? And similarly, I also have range. I can specify that this number must exist within a range of numbers, and maybe not 80, let's make it 65. So we cut off at the American Social Security age. If you can collect Social Security, you're too old for this application, all right? That's a great question there, Time Bender. Let me pin that. Frank, I'll briefly touch on that question. It is outside the bounds of this discussion, this session. So I'm not going to dig into it, but I will give you the quick and dirty answer. And I'll come back to Time Bender's question. But Frank's question is the difference between @onclick versus onclick in Blazor. We're not on to Blazor yet. The quick answer to this is @onclick is C#. Onclick is JavaScript. You'll see the difference between the two and how they behave. All right. Time Bender asked a question here. In addition to posting back some of this information, there's also we want to prevent cross-site scripting, so there's an anti-forgery token, not ANTO, but anti-forgery token that is available and used in ASP.NET Core. By specifying the form tag here, I don't get that being output into my into my HTML here. Oh, look at that. It did it for me. It did it anyway. I wasn't expecting that. All right. I wasn't expecting that, but there you go. It is there. So what this is this is a request verification token that is only able to be replayed once back to the server. It's sometimes you'll hear these referred to as a nonce, N-O-N-C-E. They're only allowed to be used once, and a new one is generated on every request, right? So this one ends with 7 UDO4, right? If I refresh the page, take a look again, it has a different value at the end here, okay? So it's a jumbled mess here that's unique to this service that can only be used once. And if that value doesn't validate properly, the server on post will reject it and say, this isn't a valid value that's been submitted here. It'll, right, so let's see, if I go in here, right, I can go change that value. Not in the footer, it's in here. Where is it? Right, I'm gonna go and purposely change that value. Something that we shouldn't really do here, right? But I'm just gonna muck with this and change the value there. Okay, there it is. And if I try to save, look at that, it got ahead of me. Gosh. Go somewhere else. Let me key these in. Of course, Philadelphia 23. Save. And yeah, see, because I messed up. It should reject that value because I changed it, right? Right, if that's a bad validation token, it shouldn't allow it to come through. Or if it's missing completely, right? Just completely delete it. Fritz, Philadelphia, 24. Save. Now, why did it accept that? It shouldn't have accepted that. Because there's a validation built in here that it should be doing. That should have been on by default. I'm going to double check this. Oh, look at that, it reloaded for me. Thank you. 25. I'm going to grab that validation token. Delete its value. Okay. Nothing came back. It isn't showing me anything. It's effectively rejected what was posted. And if I go back over here, nah, it didn't log it. This is ASP.NET validating, right, to the question we had earlier. I thought this was enabled by default, but I will go through and explain now. This is preventing cross-site scripting. This is preventing somebody from hosting a form on another site and posting data into you because they don't have that token. All right. So this anti-forgery token that you saw being displayed here, come here, you. It's down at the bottom of the form, right there. Okay. If that isn't present when you've instructed the controller to validate it, and that's what that is doing, it will block and it will prevent any type of interaction from taking place. I don't think... No. I'm not going to get into filters. So it prevents somebody on another website from posting data into you, because that's a cross-site scripting issue, right? They're posting data into you. You're going to return some sort of data that is going to be presented to that website. They might be doing it through a frame or something to hide that real interaction that's taking place. So if you're posting data, we strongly recommend you use this anti-forgery token and validation, which is being generated for you automatically. I didn't add any of that information. It was added for me to ensure that you're not getting cross-site scripting. Yeah, if I added it to the options up front, yes. But by default, it isn't there. So, I'm not going to get into... I don't want to get into filters too far right now. So. All right. Yes, right, the value does go into a cookie. Let me go back over to network. Here, cookies, anti-forgery, there it is. So if for some reason this doesn't match the value that was in the form and it isn't what they expect, it blows it out. Completely ignores it. All right. No. Back over here. So now let's talk about the actual validating of content here, right? This is, right, cross-site scripting is its own thing here. But in addition to posting data, this object, right, I mentioned it's being model bound. It's going to find those appropriate fields in what was posted and jam them into the employee object. And my employee object has these attributes, required and range. And I can use them to set appropriate validation requirements on my object, right? Before that method even processes. So I can say, well, if that model state, if the object that was passed in here, evaluate all the component and annotations, and if they all pass, if it's valid, right, then do this. Otherwise, do that. And what you'll see folks do is they won't do temp data put, right, but they'll do database.insert, right, insert record, right, whatever that database interaction is, right? You're using entity framework, whatever your persistence model is here, right, or whatever business logic, business action you want to take place, right? They'll take that step here. I'm just putting it into temp data so we can see it, what was posted, and then redirect to action so they prevent that behavior from occurring, and then return to view. So what you might see is, right, temp data put, right, employee registered successfully, and right, maybe instead of return to validate, we'll go back to index on the home controller, and I'm not even gonna right, I'm gonna add and let's call this success message, right, because I'm just putting a string success message. Let me go back to the index, right, and I can say if temp data contains key, what was it called, success message, right, and let's see, text success, right, that sounds good. I don't know. Temp data success message, right? So if it was successful, and I'm taking a look over here, did it rebuild properly? Build. Yeah, good. And it's refreshing my page. Good. Right, so if I save here, well, the employee name is required. Field is required, right? So those were the error messages that were added here on my employee. Actually, I'm sorry. The age, don't lie this time, right? So that's the name of my display that it put. And it's saying field is required. The employee name field is required, right? So it's kind of formatted that error message for me. I can change the error message if I'd like. There's an error message parameter here. So I can say, and it will override and display that for me. right? If I save, why didn't it output my error message? No, it didn't output the right error message. Why am I not getting the right error message? Should have rebuilt there. And I've outputted there. Not quite sure. You've used Flask. This doesn't look much. This looks so much better. Oh, thank you. I hate mid Smurfs. No, I'm not colorblind. Why would you say is this guy colorblind? So I'm not going to get too much into model state. I'm not going to get into all the specifics of it. But because there's a whole rabbit hole that you can go down. Is validating the missing field, not the range? No, you're missing your validation for that field. You can have multiple items, multiple definitions on that, multiple requirements, right? Oh, you know what? It's validating on the required. All right, so let me change the age. Let's make it this. Yeah. So now it's updating that automatically as I change information here, right? 27. No, 27. See that? And employee registered successfully. It redirected back, and that temp data is being painted on the screen. Yes, I'm using blue blocker computer vision gunner glasses. So yeah, it was the required state. Okay. You can validate data. ASP.NET Core comes with hooks, so you can validate data both on the server and in the browser by default. And this is where jQuery comes in, and where people go, oh, why do you have jQuery? Do we really need jQuery? I don't want to use jQuery. It's so old. It works fantastic. You can get as complex as you'd like, but built in, it comes with the framework is this validation scripts partial. I can remove this entirely, and it will still validate on the server. But do you really want to do a postback to validate some of this data? Not really. Why didn't you grab that last line? You fool! Comment that whole thing up. Things like this, like validating this data, it's really convenient to validate on the client. It's a much better experience than having to wait for it to go to the server and return. So even without using jQuery and that validation script, I can look at the network here, and if I try and save, you'll see I get the data being returned, and it's posted and it's returning and showing you this data isn't correct, but I had to make the round trip. The validation scripts partial here, you can include conditionally on those pages that need validation, and we can appropriately validate and present error messages. It's built in. It's this unobtrusive validation that's being generated for you. Let me show you what's actually in this partial that's being referenced. It's referencing the jQuery validate JavaScript library and the jQuery validate unobtrusive JavaScript library. This way, it's not going and hacking and placing content all over your page. By including that, and go back over here, I'll reload this. And so here this is, let me show you the validation that it added. Here's my form. Okay. It added we added these data val attributes so that it knows, well, here's information for validation on these controls. It doesn't, the data-val attributes don't change the behavior of these controls at all. They don't change the appearance of them at all. And they don't change the way that any scripts that you may have written will interact with them. The jQuery libraries that are being referenced here will parse and interact with those at the time of submission. It's all unobtrusive. It's not modifying any of your code. It's attaching onto it only because you added that reference. It's attaching on and enforcing these data attributes that you've requested. Okay. I would avoid regex validation. Regular expressions can be easily overloaded, and there are ways to make them do some nasty things that hackers can exploit on your server and end up breaking things. So we recommend you do not use regular expressions for validation. I'm not going to get into configuration of those error messages and things using localization. I want to do a whole localization session 2 or 3 episodes down. But we definitely need to get into globalization and localization with ASP.NET Core. Those are very important topics that we do need to cover to make sure that regardless of where your visitors are visiting your application from, that their data, their labels, their numbers are formatted in a way that respect their local cultures and behaviors. So the unobtrusive validation for building forms, so easy to use, tons of value in adding that there, that you can build, you can write your own script to go and interact with that and present, and that might be something that you want to do to make your application unique. However, if you're building a simple set of pages that are going to be used on your intranet, you're not too concerned with them looking like other pages out there. Real easy to put a class on some of those things so that you can see exactly and be able to get this productivity bounce of, you don't have to write all the validators. You specify these are the requirements, and it just enforces that. The framework enforces that. Is ASP.NET the whole framework like Flask is? ASP.NET is just the web framework. ASP.NET sits on top of .NET, and you can program for .NET and ASP.NET using C#, using Visual Basic, using F#. So you're trying to add validation depending on a user's location. You want to do like geofencing. In that case, you need to wire up from the browser some way to fetch the location from the browser and pass that into a field that you're then going to test against. However, you're trusting what comes out of the browser. Might not always be accurate. You're going to want a secondary check that's going to come out of maybe an IP check against a geolocation database, which isn't going to be 100% accurate. Certainly when folks add VPN into the mix, or something like the Onion router, forget it. All that stuff goes out the window. You're not going to be able to get their location properly or reliably. So yes, Microsoft does live streams here on the Visual Studio channel several times on Mondays, about a half dozen shows throughout the week. There's a complete schedule just below us here on the Twitch channel. Make sure you check it out. We've got all kinds of information for developers, whether you're building mobile apps, desktop apps, web apps, cloud apps, IoT apps, working with a database, all kinds of great information for you. And there's an entire Microsoft developer community team you can check out just below here on Twitch. Click through there. There's a bunch of folks, including the Microsoft Developer Channel there, that you can check out and see all kinds of great stuff, all kinds of material for developers that want to advance their career, want to learn new techniques, new technologies. So, I'm not going to put that up because I don't want to put. But the question here is, when I'm talking about validation, do I mean user or input validation? Well, aren't they the same? I want to validate the inputs that are being submitted by my users. So I want to make sure that the data being submitted is legitimate. I can't trust the data that's being sent. So if I'm going to attempt to do, as stated earlier, some sort of geolocation validation, that can be easily faked, right? If I'm inspecting that somehow in the browser and sending it back, that's easy to fake. And there's even a thing in the developer tools here where you can go through and you can change your location and see how it behaves. So Visual Studio Code, depending on your extensions, will take longer for some people and shorter for other folks. All right, so there are all kinds of things you can do with validation. There are plenty of directions that you can extend and take this. My link isn't here in my notes. You can, where'd it go? Back into the code. You can add an interface on here. I believe it's validatable object. And there's an interface method here, validate. By implementing this interface and writing this method, you can actually take extra steps to say, here's some additional validation information that we're going to enforce. So maybe I want to take this and for the upper end, instead of 65, let's push it out to 200. Nobody's going to be 200 years old. But what I can do is I can say, I can inspect and say something like, if age is greater than 65 and city does not equal Orlando, Florida, retirement, then I believe it's, right, I'm going to return a collection of validation results. Out results equals new list validation results. And I could say out results, add new validation result, and I can pass in the error message and that I want to include there. Come here, you. Right? And I can even specify the member names that triggered that validation result, right? If you're over 65, you must be from Orlando, right? And I can specify that that's for the members, the properties, city and age. And I've added that check now, that additional check to, I got to return the results. I've added that check to my employee object, and I can go and enforce that appropriately. So that's right. Other ways, other things that you may want to be able to validate, you want to inspect, interact with, that are not just, hey, validate the contents of this one field, but because of this field and that field, double check the two. Or maybe you want to go check something in a database and you want to go verify somebody's email format or something. Actually, there is an email format here. There's an email address format that you can enforce, right? So, right, if I add string email and I specify that's an email address and it's required, I can go back over to, where'd it go? Here. Let's add one more field. I mean, this gets easy when you can do things like this. Right? I don't even have to think about that. I can generate those 5 lines of code to just output that email field, save that, go back over to my browser here, and it's already updated and put the email field on there because it automatically reloads for me, right? Fritz, city, I'll do Philadelphia again, 28. And my is Fritz at Microsoft.com, and I try and save this. That's not a valid email address. Okay. Fritz at Microsoft.com, still not a valid email address, right? But if I do make it that is a valid email address, and it will allow it through. Employee registered successful. So there's a couple other ones, a couple other data annotations out there. I'll include in the notes links to all the various data annotations. There's a great article on the Microsoft Docs that'll show you all of those that you can use to help enforce those attributes, enforce those properties, that information about that object. There's even a way to specify actually a different object that contains all of the properties for that. And I forget exactly how to do that. I'm going to put the information in the notes for you so that you can see exactly how to do that. Maybe you have one object and you want to specify all of those properties somewhere else. You can do it. You can provide that surrogate object that includes all of the enforcements you want to do. So I forget exactly how to do it, but like I said, I'll include in the notes. Let me see, a couple questions coming through. Let me reflect back in here, take a look. We can do every check with this interface. Yes. The notes will be made available here. Let me see. Did I turn on the GitHub link? I did not. Let me turn on the GitHub command. The sample will be available in the GitHub repository right there. It's not committed in yet. When I get done, if you're watching the recording, it is updated. You can find the GitHub link just below the video on YouTube. Here on Twitch, it's not updated yet because we're still writing it. So that will all be available for you at the end of the stream. A couple more questions coming through. I want to make sure. Let me... a handful of questions here. Let me go to these. Why didn't that add? Oh, it did. It's already there. There was... Where'd that other question go? I had another question here. Let me go to this one from Govnoidovich. I hope I'm pronouncing that rightly. Now that I'm running the application locally, will I show how to post the site on the web hosting? Yes, we will have a publish and how to interact with publishing your website, whether it's publishing as a package locally and then uploading to some service, publishing directly to Azure. I will definitely show how to do publishing, how to interact with Docker, those types of things. That type of hosting session I will make sure is scheduled. And it'll probably be a little bit further down the curriculum, a little bit further along, just because I want to get through some of the authoring types of discussions first. Whip replacement has a question here regarding Avoiding regular expression validation, using a lot on some forms that have a bit more advanced data format like MAC address, IP address, or serial numbers. I'm almost out of coffee. How would you validate these formats? Regex seems like a perfect fit. Regular expression will work with those formats. The challenge and the problem that you'll see is people can submit poorly formed data that will force your regular expression to break and run, consume all your processor, right? It'll peg the processor. It's a common thing that hackers know how to do with sites that are validating data. Other ways to do it, I would interact and possibly use things like substrings and inspecting appropriately to, right, doing other string inspections, right? Actually split and look at the length of a string, and taking several steps to do that. It will be more secure. It'll prevent that type of regex hacking from happening on your site. So, does it apply to client side only, or even on the back end? On the back end, especially on the back end. Especially on the back end, it works. On the client side, they're messing themselves up if they're putting some badly formatted data in there, and they're breaking their own JavaScript running in their own browser. Who cares? But running on the server, take those couple extra steps. It won't be as efficient, but it will be more secure. So, and that's something that was kind of drilled into me by our security officer. Don't use regular expressions on the server for user submitted data. Data that you acquire somewhere else automatically that isn't user submitted, go ahead and use a regular expression. You can set a global timeout on regex processing, and it is annoying, but there are ways around it. But I like to avoid it altogether, personally. Personally. And there's a further follow-up question here from Caparino. Can we use custom validators? There are instructions for how to build validators on the docs. Let me see if I can grab that real quick. And I think it's you implement iValidate something. Oh, custom validator. Well, that was in web controls. That's .NET Framework 4.8. But there are ways to do custom client-side validation. I have this link in the notes already, but I didn't include it here. And the custom server-side validation, I would go through that iValidatable object to do any custom validation that you want to do. But you can write additional validator attributes. Right, so validation attributes, built-in attributes. You can define and build your own attributes. I don't see a link to it, but there's source code here for the data annotations, where you can see things like credit card validation. You can min length, phone number, email should have been there's email address, right? So you can see this is an attribute and implements data type attribute. Attribute usage is on these. This is a little bit further along, right? And all this is doing is saying, well, make sure that the last index of the @sign. I'm not sure what it's doing there. If there's only one @ character, right? Okay. So it's not actually checking to see that it's a valid email address. You might have a list of domains that are valid against. You may want to extend this and inspect. But there's links to source code for how those are made if you want to build your own custom validators that you want to place in your code. Yeah, custom validators are things that I like to avoid, right? If there's anything further than just the basic, well, I'm going to inspect these values for range, max length, they're required. I'll do the validatable object, and I'll write a little bit of C# code down here, just to make it a little bit easier, explicit, and there it is. So. All right. I've got about half hour left. I want to talk about configuration. So I'm going to shift off of this topic and talk about configuration for a bit here. Configuration, as we think about our applications, is something that we want to be able to hand off to the operators of our website, right? Those application level configuration options that are being defined around the outside of our application. So when we think about that and we look at our projects, if you used ASP.NET in the past, you had a web.config file hanging out there, right? You might have some sort of a JSON file. In ASP.NET Core, we now have appsettings.json that has configuration information about, well, what are the log levels that you want to allow to report on based on different areas of the application. This is why I wanted to get into logging today, but I'm not going to have time to get to it. And in this case, what hosts are allowed to connect to this web server? I can specify that here. And this is a JSON file that ships by default and works by default with all of our applications. I can add my own configuration values here, right? Things like, I don't know, default font color, and I'll make that, let's make it something so you can see it. Lime. I can read that value using an iConfiguration object. And we saw that when we talked about startup a few sessions ago, that here's this iConfiguration object. This is being inserted, it's being injected into my web server. It's got information about how this web server's been configured, and for the purposes of inspecting during startup, it stashes a copy here in this property. But it's also made available to us through dependency injection, so I can use that throughout my application. So I can go back over, let's go to the home controller. And inside my home controller, this is receiving a logger. We saw a little bit about working with the logger before, but I'm going to receive iConfiguration, and I'll just call it configuration. Let me control dot on this and get my using statement appropriately. I can also, because this is Visual Studio 2019, I'll create and assign a field called configuration. And when my index is returned here, I'm going to return information about what color I want that default font. I'll pass that back so that we know what that is. And I can kind of cheat here. Hey, format that nicely for me. Thank you. And put that into what's called the view bag, which is just a collection of properties and things that I can access. So it's just a bag of properties, right? So I'll call this default font color equals configuration, and I can access that property that was set over here in my app settings, default font color, by just referencing it right there. So now I'll go back into here, and for this bit here, I'll say style equals color view bag default font color, and it'll output that configuration value right there. So that's interesting. Oh, what did I break? I broke something. Cannot apply indexing and dynamic objects. Really? You're gonna make me... What do you mean I can't get it? Yeah, viewBag is... Okay. Haha! Alright, fine. It is a dynamic, so it's just dot. It's not an indexer like that. Alright, fine. Go refresh. Let it rebuild. And now... Yeah. There it is. I will go back into my page. Where'd it go? And now my default font color is lime. It's ugly, it's hideous, but it took it out of my configuration. Okay. Now it took it from app settings, which means, right, there might be information here like database connection string. Let me change that to blue, right? Whatever it might be, and now I refresh and it updates appropriately. Now it updated because it did a rebuild, because it saw a file change and redeployed. There are other places you can inject configuration from that get layered on top of what's in that app settings file. Okay? That was censored for hostility. I will allow that to be posted. So. Yes, I am using the .NET 5 built-in dependency injection framework. So, this data is being grabbed by default from app settings JSON. You can provide overrides in app settings environment name.json. So I can also add here default font color, and maybe when I'm in the development environment, I don't want it to be blue, I want it to be purple. Whatever it might be. And I'll refresh and it becomes purple. Now, there are times and reasons where you'll want different configurations for different environments. And that's what this app settings .environment name does for you here. Okay? You may have different colors, you may have different logging levels, you may, because when you're in development, give me all the logging information. I log everything because I'm in development. But when I'm in production, don't. I only want to see warnings and errors. Not even warnings, I only want to see errors in production, right? So you'll have different environment names and different behaviors you want to happen in those different environments without having to configure and touch each individual environment separately. So we need to have that flexibility to be able to interact with and build our applications. Now, what if I want to set configuration at the machine level? You can do this with environment variables. Our configuration is layered. It's like a 7-layer cake. No. It's like 7-layer nachos. Yeah, there you go. Cake, I'm gluten-free. I don't eat cake. Haven't had cake in years. Yeah, nachos. Now we're talking. Now, right, you've got your jalapenos and your sour cream and your salsa on top, right? You got all that, and the cheese and the chips are down at the bottom, right? So you've got all those layers. Well, with ASP.NET Core, I'm hungry. It will layer not just our app settings into the configuration, but it'll also read all of your environment variables on your machine and put them in there as well. Okay, so if I go into my index here, I can inject, right? We saw how to do inject before. I can inject configuration. Now, configuration, I don't have all of this referenced, but it's in the Microsoft Extensions configuration, and I'm just going to call this config. And what I can do is I can do something like, right, just put a paragraph down at the bottom, and let me make sure I have this set to something that's not going to get me into trouble. Yeah, I can do that. So I can output config computer name, right? This is a standard variable that's set inside of Windows, and it will output that information, right? The contents of that variable, there it is, JEFritz3. It outputs that information from my environment variables into ASP.NET Core. Rats. So, this means you can put various configuration information, connection string information, for various services inside the environment variables of your hosting server, and right, which is something that one of your operations folks, the folks who actually manage where your web applications run, they can manage, they can host and set those environment variables for you. I believe that means I can also reach in and not just set that, right? I can also do something like this, ASP.NET Core environment. I like to use all caps when I'm referencing these. That should grab the environment name and output it here for us. There it is. Development. By default, we're in development mode. And when we're building with inside Visual Studio with the standard launch settings, when you go to deploy, those launch settings and things go away and that becomes production. But you can override that, as we talked about previously, by setting this environment variable on your machine. Now, so environment variables, app settings, the various app settings names. There's also a thing here when you're in development mode, and it's available really nicely inside of Visual Studio, called user secrets. So inside user secrets, I can also place a configuration value. And let's make this red because it's coming from user secrets. And if those user secrets are being parsed and interpreted, we should see that value. Oh, you know what? It's because it's in the development mode. Get rid of that, because that one takes precedence. Let's restart, because I don't think it sees the user secret file that we just wrote. Secrets.json. So, by placing things in this user secrets repository, you can have files live outside of. Now, why didn't it pick them up? It should automatically be adding them. I thought it automatically added them. Why am I not getting my user secrets? Because those values should take precedence. Where manage user secrets, default font color, red. That should have picked up. Yeah, that should have picked up. I'm not quite sure why it's not picking that one up. So, user secrets have a GUID here that on Windows points to a folder. So if I go manage user secrets, right, this opens a secrets.json. You can see there, C, users, JEFritz, app data, roaming, blah, blah, blah. Microsoft user secrets, and then the name of that folder, right? Let me turn off the navigation pane here. So Jeff Fritz app data roaming, Microsoft user secrets, and that GUID that came out of my CS proj. There's secrets JSON here, and this is just that data that it was loading. So it should be loading that. I'm not quite. Oh, there it goes. And now it has. You don't. The key thing about those user secrets isn't so much that they're not encrypted. They're just stored elsewhere on your machine. And on a Linux machine, they're hosted off of your home folder in your user directory, but they're stored outside of your project, so you don't accidentally commit them to source control, right? Things like the API keys to OneDrive or GitHub or something like that you may be using with your project, you don't want to accidentally commit into a public repository. So, what's the question there? Let me take a look. Does it load it automatically? Does it load what automatically? Azure app configuration? So that's another layer that you can add in here is if your application is registered with an Azure Active Directory, it will make the Azure Key Vault available to you automatically. So this is another layer of configuration that will be injected, and an advantage of using Azure with ASP.NET Core, the way that it automatically adds in some of those capabilities. So, now we've been working with configuration, and I've got about 5 minutes left. We've been working with configuration, just pulling in string data and reading out a string value. Right, if I go back to here, right, I'm reading these as magic strings coming out of this, right? View bag default font color. Where was that? That was inside of my home controller, right? I'm interacting with this magic string pointing to my configuration. Sometimes that's not exactly how we want to interact with our data, right? You want to have something that's more strongly typed, that's always available throughout your application. What you can do is, of course, you can strongly type this by using the options pattern. So, right, maybe I have some sort of a branding configuration class, right? And inside this, I can define a property that is that default font color, right? And let's make that by default black. If I were injecting that object into my home controller instead of iConfiguration, right, I could inject my branding configuration. Let's call this just branding, and I will allocate that field, right? Well, now I can change this to just, right, branding dot default font color, and now I'm using whatever that branding class has in the default font color property. I've abstracted away how it's being loaded from configuration. I've abstracted away what that's made up of. In order to get the configuration to load in and set the values in this, we need to go back into startup, and we need to add that configuration. And I'll have a link to this documentation in the GitHub samples. I will add, where is it? No, it's configure. Models, branding configuration, and I'm going to tell it, well, where's the configuration come from that you're loading into this? Well, in this case, I'm going to read right off the top. So I'm going to load it out of the configuration object, which doesn't have everything, but it has the one field that I do want to load into that branding configuration. Then over here in my home controller, instead of receiving this object, you change this slightly to iOptions. And it knows, oh, well, that's some configuration information that's being returned. And I can make this return the value of that configuration. Consequently, then, this will be loaded up appropriately with my content. There it is. And it still renders the same way, but now I have a strongly typed configuration object that I can use without having to go find, what was the name of that configuration key that was over in the thing with the... It's all defined and kept in that options object. And there's other ways that you can work with the options here. There's other interfaces besides options. You can refer to iOptions snapshot. You can also refer to iOptions monitor that will notify you when these things change and allow you to refresh the page, interact and take steps to change the behavior of your website because some configuration changed without restarting the entire website. You view MVC as a dying application type? To each their own. There are some folks who like, who prefer this type of interaction. There are some folks who don't. I want to talk briefly now as I wrap up. I've got just a few minutes left. There's different hierarchical levels here inside of my configuration. I might have something that looks like, you know what, I want to have a branding branch here, and I may want to move this into here like that, and have a default background color, white, and be able to reference and set those appropriately. Well, if you were reaching through to get these values, they're separated by colons if you're accessing them by name. So if I was back over here in my home controller, let me receive the configuration again. Right? No, let's not do that. Bad job. Back over to index. Right? I can take this and I can, what was it, branding? Right, see, and default background color. I can separate it by colons, and now my configure will spelunk through the hierarchy and find that value and output it on screen. So the configuration object flattens all of that hierarchical content that we have in an app settings JSON and makes it just a single key value pair that we're going to output data from using colon separation. Now, if you want to set an environment variable that will target that hierarchical value, you're going to set an environment variable that looks like underscores separating that. And ASP.NET will interpret an environment variable with double underscore as, oh, that's hierarchical, replace that with a colon. Because colon isn't handled well on Unix-based operating systems. Finally, if you're on Azure and you need to do this type of spelunking through, they use dashes. They don't use hyphens, they don't use the colons. You can use colons on Windows and it works just fine to separate these and indicate that it's a child key, but they use dashes on Azure. We are out of time. Oh my goodness, that was quick. That was quick. Let me wrap this up, head back over to the main page over here, and let's call it a day. That was loud. Thank you so much for tuning in. If you're watching over on Microsoft Developer on Learn TV, thanks so much for tuning in. We'll see you next time. If you're watching on YouTube, I hope you enjoyed this week's episode. There's links to all the questions, to all the source code just below me here in the description. It's over in our GitHub repository. Check it out. You're gonna have a great time tinkering with everything that we've learned and we've been working with. And I hope you have a really good time checking that out over on YouTube. There's links to the entire playlist here. I hope you subscribe to the Visual Student, to the .NET channel. Check that out, and just below over here is a link to our previous video in the series if you want to go back. All right. Thank you so much for tuning in over on YouTube.